In a small, seemingly quiet town, a boy named Daniel carried a weight that many would not recognize at first glance. His world was filled with the silent ache of unspoken words and unanswered questions, mirrored in a collection of letters he kept carefully tucked away in a worn, leather-bound box. These weren't ordinary letters. They were messages from people who had once reached out, seeking connection, comfort, or understanding, only to be met with silence or rejection. To anyone passing by, Daniel appeared as just another restless child, but beneath his innocent gaze lay a mind haunted by fragments of stories, regrets, and unspoken hopes. His private sanctuary, filled with these unopened or unanswered letters, became both a refuge and a burden, an archive of wounded souls that he couldn't bear to discard. The problem was more profound than simply holding on to old correspondence. It was the emotional chaos that swirled within him, a mixture of empathy and helplessness that grew with each new letter he discovered. Every note represented a human experience he felt responsible to hold on to, even when he lacked the words or strength to respond. Their pain became his, embedding itself deep into his heart, transforming his youthful innocence into a quiet, unspoken empathy that isolated him from others. His secret was his suffering, and it seemed as if he was carrying a lifetime of stories that no one would ever hear, no matter how desperately he longed for someone to listen. What makes this story stand out is not just the boy's collection of unanswered letters, but the extraordinary way he transforms his burden into a literary journey that captures the world's attention. Instead of suppressing his pain or retreating into despair, Daniel begins to weave the fragments of these stories into a narrative, one that is raw, honest, and powerful enough to resonate with anyone who has ever felt overlooked or unheard. What begins as a personal act of preservation soon takes on a life of its own, carving a space for empathy in a world that often values noise over silence. The boy's journey is not one of simple redemption, but a testament to the resilience of vulnerability and the unexpected ways human stories can connect across barriers of age, language, and circumstance. This is a story about more than just a boy and his letters. It explores the quiet, often unseen struggles of empathy and the profound impact that one person's willingness to confront their own pain can have on a broader community. Daniel's act of holding on to these silent voices becomes a bridge, the act of turning suffering into art, of transforming the intangible into something tangible and shareable. It asks its audience to consider their own unspoken stories and the potential they hold for healing, connection, and even transformation. It challenges the notion that pain must remain hidden or internalized, and instead suggests that vulnerability, when harnessed thoughtfully, can lead to unforeseen beauty and understanding. As the story unfolds, the reader is invited into Daniel's world, one where silence is loud enough to drown out hope, yet also fertile ground for something extraordinary to bloom. The journey ahead hints at the power of storytelling, not just as a way of coping but as a means of inspiring change. It hints at the possibility that pain, when acknowledged and expressed, can become a catalyst for growth, empathy, and healing. The boy's secret, once a source of quiet torment, becomes a catalyst for a larger conversation, a testament to the extraordinary potential hidden within the most unlikely of places. What starts as a personal, almost secret ritual of preservation transforms into an act that captures the hearts of many, revealing the incredible strength that can be found in vulnerability and the timeless power of the human voice. Building on this, however, the impact of transforming silent suffering into shared narratives extends beyond mere catharsis. It acts as a catalyst for societal introspection. When one person dedicates energy to elevating overlooked voices, it inadvertently encourages others to examine their own unspoken burdens. Much like a stone dropped into a still pond creates ripples that spread further than expected, the act of giving voice to hidden stories initiates a chain reaction, inspiring collective acknowledgement of struggles long dismissed or ignored. This ripple effect often manifests in small communities or online platforms, where a single story can spark widespread conversations about mental health, social injustices, or personal resilience. The process underscores the vital importance of visibility, not just for those who share their pain, but for society as a whole to recognize and validate the hidden layers of human experience. Furthermore, imagining the power of these stories as multifaceted crystals reveals how each facet reflects a different angle of truth. When Daniel's collection of narratives gains recognition, it becomes more than an assemblage of individual sorrows. it evolves into a comprehensive mosaic of human complexity. Each story, like a prism, refracts a unique perspective, some shrouded in despair, others glowing with hope. Yet all contribute to a broader understanding of the collective human condition. This allows the audience to see beyond stereotypes and superficial judgments, fostering empathy rooted in genuine understanding. In this manner, the narrative becomes a tool not only for healing, but for breaking down barriers that have historically separated communities, exposing the interconnectedness that underpins shared adversity. Switching focus, the act of translating hidden pain into a published work introduces questions about the ethical responsibilities of the creator. When a story is shared beyond its original context, it risks becoming commodified or stripped of its original nuance. Here lies a delicate balance, safeguarding the integrity and authenticity of each voice while making it accessible to a broader audience. This challenge demands careful stewardship, akin to tending a delicate garden. Each story must be cultivated with respect, ensuring it's presented with the dignity it deserves. The creator must navigate the tension between vulnerability and privacy, often weighing the benefits of increased awareness against the potential for re-traumatization or misinterpretation. This process underscores the importance of creating a safe space for storytelling, where the voices are amplified with care and responsibility, rather than sensationalized for commercial gain. Meanwhile, another layer to consider is how this transformation influences the perception of resilience. Often, stories of pain are associated solely with victimhood, inadvertently reinforcing a narrative of helplessness. Yet, when these stories are shared, especially through the lens of growth or healing, they reframe suffering as a forge that can strengthen character. Daniel's work exemplifies this shift. By turning his collection into a best-selling book, he not only validates each individual story, but also underscores that adversity, when acknowledged and woven into a collective tapestry, becomes a source of empowerment. This perspective challenges readers to see struggles not as endpoints, but as chapters within a larger journey of self-discovery and endurance. It invites audiences to appreciate how confronting personal pain can catalyze transformation, making resilience a shared attribute rather than an isolated virtue. Finally, consider how such narratives reshape cultural narratives around vulnerability. The act of openly acknowledging pain defies societal expectations that equate strength with stoicism. Instead, it highlights that true strength lies in the courage to face one's deepest vulnerabilities and share them openly. When Daniel's collection garners widespread attention, it signals a societal shift, one that values authenticity over superficial appearances. This, in turn, encourages individuals to embrace their own imperfections and insecurities, recognizing them as integral components of genuine human experience. The power in this approach resides in its potential to dismantle stigmas that have long silenced honest dialogue, replacing shame with compassion. As these stories gain prominence, they foster a cultural environment where vulnerability is no longer perceived as weakness, but as a vital step toward connection, understanding, and collective healing. Now consider how this applies when you encounter moments of vulnerability in your own life. Instead of viewing discomfort or emotional exposure as signs of weakness, recognize them as opportunities for genuine growth. When you allow yourself to openly confront fears and admit struggles, you participate in a process similar to tending a fragile plant, requiring patience, careful nurturing, and sometimes a willingness to face the messiness of the process without rushing to conceal it. This approach reveals a broader principle. Authenticity acts as a catalyst for deeper connections, forging bonds that are not superficial, but rooted in shared imperfection. In practice, this might mean refraining from masking anxiety in a high-pressure situation, or resisting the urge to respond defensively when criticism arises. The act of embracing vulnerability thus becomes a form of resilience, demonstrating strength by choosing transparency over self-protection. Building on this, however, it's essential to acknowledge the societal tendency to stigmatize weakness subtly but persistently. Many cultural norms equip us with a narrative that equates vulnerability with fragility, discouraging open expression for fear of judgment or rejection. Therefore, uncovering the deeper significance of personal honesty demands a conscious effort to challenge these ingrained beliefs. When you consciously engage in honest self-reflection and share parts of yourself previously hidden, you are, in effect, rewriting that internal script. You begin to view vulnerability as a brave act, akin to a lighthouse shining through fog, guiding others toward safer harbor. This mental shift has profound implications. It transforms internal shame into outward strength, positioning openness as a courageous act that inspires others to do the same. Over time, this collective shift fosters a culture where emotional honesty becomes a vital part of communal identity rather than a taboo. Moreover, embracing vulnerability on this level opens doors to richer, more nuanced understanding of others' experiences. When individuals start sharing their stories authentically, it shifts interactions from transactional exchanges to genuine dialogues. For instance, in support groups or therapy sessions, the act of revealing one's inner struggles often sparks unexpected empathy. Listeners, rather than offering superficial advice, begin to see the complexity behind the words, recognizing that behind each expression of pain lies a unique history, a set of circumstances shaped by unseen forces. This realization can dismantle stereotypes and foster a climate where compassion flourishes naturally. It becomes clear that vulnerability isn't merely about personal growth, but also a communal act that cultivates trust and mutual respect. As more people participate in this exchange, social bonds deepen, turning individual stories into collective narratives that bolster resilience across communities. Another vital facet of this theme is the role vulnerability plays in innovation and creativity. When you remove the pretenses that often block authentic expression, you unlock a wellspring of original ideas. Artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, many have discovered that inviting uncertainty into their work leads to breakthroughs that conventional thinking might suppress. Think of vulnerability as the open window in a stuffy room, letting fresh air, new perspectives, and even discomfort intrude, but ultimately revitalizing the space. For example, a novelist who bravely shares raw, personal truths may unearth themes that resonate more deeply than meticulously crafted plots. Similarly, a researcher willing to admit ignorance or the possibility of failure opens pathways that might otherwise remain hidden behind walls of overconfidence. This process underscores that embracing the unknown and exposing oneself to risk often yields the most authentic and impactful results, illustrating that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a vital ingredient of genuine innovation. Finally, recognize that fostering vulnerability as a core value creates a ripple effect that extends beyond individual interactions. It influences organizational culture, educational environments, and even leadership models. Leaders who prioritize transparency and admit their own uncertainties demonstrate that strength lies in honesty, inspiring teams to embrace their own imperfections without fear. Educational settings that encourage students to express doubts and ask questions instead of conforming to rigid standards cultivate curiosity and resilience. The ripple expands when one person models vulnerability, inviting others to follow suit, gradually transforming environments that once prioritized image and composure into spaces that prize authenticity and growth. This collective embracing of imperfection shifts societal expectations, positioning vulnerability as not a flaw, but a foundation upon which genuine human connection and progress are built. Now, consider how vulnerability can serve as a catalyst for authentic leadership, shifting the dynamics of influence and authority within groups. When leaders choose transparency over concealment, they craft an environment where trust becomes the foundation upon which collaboration flourishes. Such openness demonstrates a willingness to share uncertainties and admit mistakes, breaking down hierarchies that often discourage honest dialogue. This act of humility encourages team members to follow suit, fostering a culture in which innovation is driven not by fear of failure, but by collective experimentation. In these settings, vulnerability doesn't weaken leadership. Instead, it amplifies authority through genuine connection. When leaders model openness, they signal that setbacks are not final judgments, but opportunities for growth, a perspective that sparks resilience and motivates others to pursue their goals despite inevitable hurdles. Furthermore, embracing vulnerability unlocks a remarkable capacity for empathy that extends deeply into conflict resolution. When confronted with disagreements or misunderstandings, a person willing to openly acknowledge their partiality or emotional reactions can act as an unifying force rather than a divisive one. Unlike rigid defenses that escalate tensions, vulnerability allows space for mutual understanding to emerge. The act of sharing personal feelings in the midst of discord can diffuse hostility, demonstrating that sentiments are valid rather than dismissible. This approach also signals a readiness to accept blame or fault, which not only de-escalates confrontations, but also paves the way for constructive solutions rooted in sincerity. By revealing vulnerabilities during conflicts, individuals foster environments where honest dialogue replaces defensiveness, cultivating a climate where collective growth becomes the primary aim, rather than individual victory. Another underappreciated aspect is how vulnerability influences creative processes, especially when faced with the pressure to produce impeccable work. When creators intentionally expose their uncertainties and insecurities, they often remove the artificial barriers that inhibit originality. Ironically, admitting imperfection can serve as a liberation, freeing artists, writers, or designers from the paralyzing quest for flawlessness. For instance, an architect who openly discusses potential flaws in their early sketches invites collaborative feedback that might lead to innovative solutions, rather than sticking to a rigid plan. Such transparency invites others to contribute authentically, transforming the creative process from solitary craftsmanship into an ongoing dialogue. In doing so, vulnerability becomes a tool for disarming perfectionism, allowing ideas to evolve organically, and fostering an environment where experimentation is celebrated over static perfection. Additionally, vulnerability reshapes personal boundaries by challenging the misconception that emotional closeness requires constant exposure or intensity. It suggests instead that authentic connection often arises from moments of selective openness, where sharing slightly vulnerable truths creates a safe space for others to reciprocate on their own terms. This nuanced exchange encourages a form of intimacy that is sustainable and respectful of individual comfort levels, in contrast to the often destructive pursuit of complete transparency. Now, reflect on how this principle applies in everyday relationships. A gentle admission about feeling overwhelmed can serve as a bridge to shared understanding, rather than an invitation for unsolicited advice or judgment. Such moments of vulnerability, when handled with sensitivity, deepen bonds without risking emotional exhaustion, illustrating the delicate balance that authentic openness demands. Lastly, exploring vulnerability from a spiritual or philosophical lens reveals that embracing our imperfections aligns us more closely with the human condition itself. Recognizing our limitations and accepting our flawed nature can foster a sense of humility that dissolves ego-driven pursuits and superficial pursuits of perfection. This humility becomes a fertile ground for gratitude, patience, and compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. When individuals let go of the illusion of control and admit to their uncertainties, they often find a surprising freedom. It's as if shedding the mask of invincibility lifts a weight that had been constraining their growth. In this space, genuine self-awareness blossoms, enabling us to see the interconnectedness of all struggles and triumphs. The acknowledgement of vulnerability thus becomes a spiritual act, an acceptance that true strength resides not in the denial of weakness, but in the courage to face it head-on, opening doors to profound transformation that transcends the superficial veneer we often project. Now consider how vulnerability influences the development of resilience over time, especially in the face of repeated failures or setbacks. When individuals openly acknowledge their imperfections without retreating into shame, they create a resilient internal architecture that resists the erosion of confidence that often accompanies adversity. Each time someone admits they are struggling, they actively disassemble the false narrative that perfection is attainable, replacing it with an understanding that setbacks are inherent to growth. This mental shift cultivates a more adaptable mindset, where failures are not seen as definitive endpoints, but as necessary chapters in a larger story of perseverance. In practical terms, it means approaching challenges with a mindset that sees obstacles as opportunities to refine skills or deepen understanding, rather than as reflections of personal inadequacy. The process of embracing vulnerability thus becomes a form of armor, fortifying individuals against the inevitable storms of life by reinforcing their capacity to bend yet not break. Building on this, however, the role of vulnerability in fostering authentic self-awareness cannot be overstated. When you willingly expose parts of your inner landscape, especially those that display flaws or fears, you gain a clearer vantage point from which to recognize your true motivations and values. This act of self-disclosure functions like a mirror held up in a dim room, illuminating aspects previously hidden beneath layers of self-deception or societal expectations. As clarity emerges, You begin to discern patterns in your reactions and decisions, unmasking the subtle influences that have shaped your habits. By confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, you break free from subconscious autopilot and step into conscious choice. In this way, vulnerability becomes a catalyst for inner growth, transforming passive acceptance of one's limitations into an active pursuit of self-improvement rooted in honesty rather than denial. Moreover, when you integrate vulnerability into your emotional repertoire, relationships evolve from transactional exchanges into genuine dialogues grounded in mutual recognition. Depth arises when both parties move beyond surface-level interactions and dare to reveal their uncertainties, their mistakes, their doubts. This shared openness generates a feedback loop where empathy flourishes, not as a superficial gesture, but as an authentic acknowledgement of human fragility. For instance, in a friendship where one admits to feeling overwhelmed by personal challenges, the other responds not with judgment, but with compassion, creating a safe space to air vulnerabilities without fear of rejection. As both individuals practice this form of openness, they forge bonds that are resilient because they are rooted in truth, not facade. Over time, such relationships act as anchors in turbulent times, reminding us that true connection is built on honesty about our imperfections. Another dimension worth exploring is how vulnerability can serve as a fertile ground for innovation, especially in environments that prize conformity or fear deviation. When you shed the veneer of invincibility, barriers to experimentation dissolve. Instead of being paralyzed by the possibility of failure or ridicule, embracing vulnerability prompts a mindset where risks are viewed as necessary ingredients for breakthroughs. Imagine a startup founder who openly discusses doubts about a new product. This transparency invites team members to voice their concerns and suggest alternative approaches without shame. The collective willingness to confront weaknesses head-on spurs creativity, as it creates a culture where ideas are tested, refined, and iterated without shame. In this context, vulnerability acts as a seedbed for dynamic problem-solving because it allows for the messy, unpredictable nature of innovation to unfold naturally, unencumbered by the fear of imperfection. Finally, shifting focus from individual growth to societal impact reveals how vulnerability can challenge entrenched power structures and societal norms. When communities collectively embrace honesty about their struggles, be it economic disparity, systemic injustice, or cultural trauma, they ignite a movement toward collective healing and reform. This sort of openness dismantles the veneer of strength that often masks systemic problems, forcing institutions to confront truths long concealed behind protocols and politeness. Now consider how public acknowledgement of injustice by marginalized groups has historically propelled social change. Each act of exposing vulnerability in the face of oppression acts as a beacon, calling others to bear witness and advocate for transformation. In effect, societal vulnerability functions as a form of courageous transparency that, while initially risky, can erode the foundations of denial and complacency. It reveals the human cost of systemic neglect, compelling communities and leaders alike to reckon with realities they might prefer to ignore, and opening pathways toward more authentic, equitable solutions. Drawing these strands together, we see a tapestry woven from threads of authenticity, resilience, and profound connection, each strand reinforcing the others in a subtle yet unbreakable synergy. The landscape of human experience, with its inherent fragility and unpredictability, becomes less daunting when approached through the lens of vulnerability, transforming perceived weaknesses into sources of strength and growth. This interconnection suggests that genuine courage lies not in the absence of fear or doubt, but in the willingness to face such internal truths openly, allowing the raw material of our imperfections to serve as the foundation for something more resilient and meaningful. When vulnerability is embraced as a vital aspect of the human condition, it acts as both a mirror and a catalyst, revealing unseen depths while propelling us toward authentic engagement with ourselves and the world around us. In this context, the act of revealing our authentic selves in moments of shared vulnerability serves as a bridge that connects disparate parts of our inner worlds, collapsing the barriers erected by pretense and societal expectation. Such openness, though fraught with inherent risks, invites a reciprocity that can shift the entire relational landscape, fostering environments where trust is cultivated not through superficiality, but through mutual acknowledgement of our inherent fallibility. It's as if each act of honest exposure chisels away at the edifice of facade, gradually unveiling a more genuine terrain beneath, one where connection becomes rooted in truth rather than illusion. The cumulative effect is a subtle but powerful reimagining of what it means to be human, a recognition that strength in its most authentic form often resides in the capacity to be imperfect without shame. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer yet more intricate, inviting a nuanced understanding that the journey through vulnerability is not linear nor free from challenge. Instead, it resembles a delicate dance, balancing the desire for connection with the necessity of self-preservation, each step revealing new facets of ourselves as we navigate the tension between openness and boundary setting. This dance requires an ongoing conscious effort, a gentle choreography that respects our own limits while remaining receptive to the transformative potential of authentic dialogue. The more we acknowledge the complexity within every act of openness, the more we recognize that vulnerability is not a singular destination, but a continuous process, an unfolding that deepens our understanding of ourselves and others in ways previously unimagined. As we pivot towards the final reflection, it is vital to appreciate that all these threads, courage, authenticity, interconnectedness, are part of a larger narrative that underscores the profound human capacity for growth amidst imperfection. The resonance of this perspective lies in its invitation to see vulnerability not as a liability, but as a vital ingredient in the alchemy of transformation. It's a reminder that genuine strength often emerges in moments of surrender, when we relinquish the illusion of control and lean into the discomfort of uncertainty. This understanding propels us toward a broader acknowledgement that embracing our imperfect nature is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to our resilience, an act of bravery that enables us to forge deeper connections and unlock unforeseen possibilities. Reflecting on this journey so far, it becomes evident that the true essence of human evolution may reside precisely in our willingness to be seen, flawed, tentative, yet resilient. The journey of openness and self-acceptance, therefore, is not merely a personal pursuit but a collective movement towards authentic recognition. As we stand at the cusp of final insight, the horizon appears less of a distant goal and more of a shared landscape we shape through each honest step. With this awareness, the overarching narrative shifts from one of individual effort to a universal call to embrace the full spectrum of human fragility, acknowledging that, in doing so, we unlock the potential for genuine connection, profound understanding, and ultimately transformation that reverberates far beyond the confines of our individual lives.